This morning's workshop is utilizing the protective factors survey with families. Our presenter is Samantha Flory, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Samantha. Samantha has over 20 years of experience in family support and program development. She's developed and delivered specialized training and provided technical assistance to family strengthening networks and organizations across the country. Before she joined Friends, Samantha was the director of training for the National Family Support Network, or NFSN, and her previous work included almost a decade as a training specialist with strategies here in California. So she is coming full circle. And she has also had several years as the director of education and learning with the Executive Service Corps of Chicago. Samantha has a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire and a master's degree in marriage and family therapy from the University of San Diego. Welcome, Samantha. We are so happy to have you back this morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me back. It's really nice to be here and to get back into learning about what's happening in California. As Dana said, I used to work with the strategies program, so very familiar with a lot of the work and the programs there in the state. So happy to be here today to talk more about the protective factor survey and how you use it with families. But I want to kick this off by just giving a little bit of background about Friends, the Friends National Center for Community-Based Child Abuse Prevention. We call that CBCAP. I'm sure many of you have heard that before, lots of acronyms out there. But what we do at Friends, we're funded by the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families, the Children's Bureau, to promote the purposes of CBCAP. And really what that means is we provide training and technical assistance to help states meet the requirements that they have to meet with the funding. So that includes Title II of the Child Abuse Prevention Treatment Act. And I'll be sharing a lot today about our Friends resources and information that we have. Many of you may have heard us do other webinars with Caltrin, including the Logic Model webinar that we did last fall, and also the one that we did around choosing a protective factor survey last month. So really happy to be a part of this. I am the technical assistance provider for CBCAP for the state of California. And so we'll work closely with OCAP there around any needs that they have with their CBCAP funding. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. And we're going to get into an introduction around the protective factor survey. And for those of you that were with us on March 16th, where we really went deep into the surveys to help you decide which one to use, we are going to do a little bit of background today. There might be a couple of things that you hear are the same. And it's really to help kind of establish that baseline so you understand the survey before we get into how you really use it with families. So hang tight. If you were with us, and some of it, the first few slides may sound familiar, but it really is important to give that background so that we can get into how you really use this. So we'll talk about those. We're going to talk about the difference between the retrospective and the traditional, and then we're actually going to get into, okay, you're going to be using this survey. What does that look like for you? Either if you're the staff that's going to be administering it with families, or what does it look like if you're a supervisor and you're supervising staff that may be administering the survey with families. We're going to go over all of that. We're going to share some tips. We're going to share scripts that you can use when using the survey with families. And we're also going to have some discussion time. And for those of you that may have been there on March 16th, we got a lot of questions. And so I'm going to spend some time really getting into questions that we've heard from all of you around the survey and the use of the survey. So I want to make sure we give time to that. I do want to let you know, for those of you that are interested in the database, today's training, we're not really going to dive into the database at all. I will, of course, talk about it. I'll talk about how you use the database as you're administering the survey with families and what that can look like. But we won't be doing a demo of the database or anything like that. I will share more information with you in a little bit about where you can hear about that and what that might look like. But just wanted to let you know today really about the survey itself and how you use it with families. And one thing I want to clarify for everybody is that the protective factor survey is available to everyone. Whether you are in California, if you're in another state, wherever you may be working, this survey is free and available to all. And I will be showing you where it is up on the Friends website and how you can access that at any time for your use. We do also have the database that I mentioned. This too is available to everyone. And I'll go in a little bit later into what some of the cost structure looks like with the survey. Spoiler, it's not very much. And so you certainly can use the database on your own if you're not part of another state that happens to already be using it. So want to let you all know that this training is really for everyone today, to learn about the survey and know that you can use it, and there are no requirements or anything in order for you to be able to use it. So what is this protective factor survey? What is the use of it? And as I mentioned, it is being used across the country. We have people up in Alaska using it, all the way down to Florida and other places. So it's being used across the country to measure changes in multiple protective factors and in multiple family protective factors. And one thing I want to be clear about with this survey, and I'll try to keep mentioning this, but it is really important to know that it's not meant to be an assessment, a true assessment tool of the family. So some of you may be familiar with assessment tools that you go through and you are looking at strengths and identifying needs of families and things like that. The protective factor survey is not meant to be that kind of tool. Now, I will tell you, when you administer the survey, you're going to get some of that information, of course, about families as you're measuring their protective factors and getting to know the family. You will get some of insight into the family and be able to use that for case planning. But this survey is not meant to be that individual type assessment tool. We do have a concrete support subscale I'll talk about in a little bit that you could use as part of that assessment. But truly, the protective factor survey isn't intended for that individual assessment, placement, or diagnostic. Instead, it really is meant to be for program effectiveness and to measure how your program is doing and to look at program evaluation. So just want to make that clear that this really is meant for that, because I know here on the slide it does say support individual case planning with families, but that really is that limited sense. The protective factors will give you kind of a picture of the family, but truly it is more meant for that program evaluation piece. So the primary focus of this survey is to give that feedback to programs so that they can do continuous quality improvement, look at their program effectiveness, use it for their evaluation processes. And it really helps give the program itself a snapshot, a large snapshot of the families that they serve and changes in protective factors of all the families that they serve. So they're not going, a program's not going in and looking at individual people, but it's looking at that larger snapshot of how their program is having an impact on the families that they're working with. It helps with that evaluation and continuous quality improvement. And so, like I mentioned, I'll go into the surveys a little bit more, and I will show you that concrete supports that you can use to get to know a little bit more specifics about the family. So I'm going to be sharing lots of different information with you all about how to links and resources that we have to interpret your results and where you can get the surveys. So lots to keep thinking about, but just wanted to be clear what the survey's meant for, more the program piece and the individual piece. So now that you have an idea of that, I just want to give a quick background because there are a couple different versions of the survey. And we have the original protective factor survey that's been around, gosh, for, I believe it's about 13, 14 years ago. And then we have the second revised edition that came out a few years ago. And both of these versions are valid, reliable. You're able to use them with families. And ultimately, it's up to your program to decide which one is the best fit. If you were not able to join us March 16th, where we did the whole training around choosing which one is the best, I know that Caltrin has a recording of that, but I'll show you in a little bit up on our Friends website. We actually have a whole web page where you can decide and kind of compare which survey might be best to use. So if you're thinking about using the protective factor survey and you haven't yet decided which version, we have resources to help you decide that. So for now, I want to give you a little bit of background on both of the surveys. And I will tell you, as we get deeper into our training today and I start sharing scripts and things, I'm going to be focused on the Protective Factors Survey second edition, which is the revised one, just because it was easier to pick one survey to go into scripts and things with today. But just know that either survey is valid. And if you happen to be using the original or decide you want to use the original, that is great and totally fine. So just wanted to let you know that. Here's just some general information about the original Protective Factors Survey. There are 20 items on it. It has a 7-point response category, and it's available in it has pre-post tests. We do have a retrospective version. We don't see many people use that with the original. It was created a little later, but we do have that available. Also available in Spanish as well. So what I'm going to do is actually hop on over to our website real quickly and show you the survey itself and how you can find it if you want to take a look at it. So what we'll do is I'm going to get into our friend's website, and this will also show you where to go with it. So here's what our friend's website looks like, our Protective Factors Survey. The original friend's website is friendsnrc.org. And when you get in there under evaluation, you just click on Protective Factors Survey, and this page will come up for you. On this page is all the information you should need if you're interested in background of it, how it was revised, all of that is here. What I want to do is come down here to show you, this is where you can find the survey itself on the left-hand side right here. So right now in green, the original Protective Factors Survey is highlighted. It talks about the information, how you know if it's the right tool for you. But over here on the left, you can actually get the survey itself. So you would click over here. Well, first I want to let you know there is a user manual. If you're interested, that's where the scripts and things will be, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But this is where you'll come to get the survey as well. You've got the Spanish adaptation on here. You've got frequently asked questions. Again, the user manual, you've got the retrospective, and then the survey itself. So this is what the original Protective Factors Survey looks like. It has a front page on it where you collect sort of the general demographic. You'll note we aren't asking for any sort of confidential information. We're not asking names, addresses, any information like that. The participant ID is something that you all decide on as an organization, what that'll be to help you track people, but we're not keeping any of that confidential information on the survey. This front page here is where you collect program information about the family that you're going to be giving the survey to. And you'll note how it's completed and all of this. So this is, I just want to give you a brief look. I'm not going to walk through each section. You can go up to the website and grab this as yourself if you're interested. But this first page is an information page. You actually will remove this page before you give the survey to the family. They don't fill this first page out. You do. And here's what the survey looks like. So this is where we were talking about it. It's on that 7-point response category, from never to always. And the way the survey works is that it provides a statement. You see here, the first statement, in my family, we talk about problems. And then the participant that's completing it will select where they feel they fall on this scale. And so they'll from never to always. So this is what this looks like. You have the first scale for the first 5 questions here, and then it comes down and the scale changes a little bit from strongly disagree to strongly agree, but it's still on that 7-point scale there to see what that looks like. And so this is just a snapshot of what the survey looks like that the families will see, or if you happen to be administering it and asking them the questions, this is what you'll be asking them. And I will get into all of this, don't worry about it too much yet, but I just wanted to show you a quick shot of the survey and how you find that on our website. So you can go and download this and use this at any time from our Friends Protective Factors website. So let's go back to looking at our slides. And we'll talk about the second version now, the revised version of the protective factor survey. The website I just showed you, this is also available there. You just click on where it says PFS2 and you get the survey the exact same way that you got it when I just showed for the first one. All the surveys are available to download on the website. And if we do any updates to them, we have the latest version on the website. So always important to check up there. If you're downloading a survey to ensure you have the most recent version, that'll be the place on the Friends website for the most recent version of the survey. Now, if you're going to be using the database, the most recent version will be in the database. You won't need to worry about going and grabbing it from our website because you'll have the database and the survey in the database. But if you're not using the database, this is where you can find the surveys up on our website. So the Protective Factors 2, the revised version was validated in 2018. It has 19 items versus 20 items. Now it only has 5 subscales. If you remember, we were just looking at the original version of the survey, and that had the 7 across, from that strongly disagree to strongly agree, or never to always. Well, in the revised, we condensed it a little because that's a lot to choose from on that 7, on the 7 across, the 7-point response. So we went to the 5-point response category here in the second edition on 0 to 4. And the questions look at not at all like my life to just like my life, or never to almost always. So that was part of the revision, was dropping it from the 7 down to the 5-point response categories. There's also checklist items, which we'll talk about. And there are the available versions. And again, as a program, you'll decide which one of these versions you want to use. There are several. So there's a traditional pre and post test. I'm sure many of you are aware of what that looks like. You administer the survey at the beginning of services and at the end, pre and post. There's a retrospective, and I'll go into what that really means and what that looks like in a little bit. But that is a reflective survey that is completed at the end of service. Now, I will say, when we're talking about the second edition of the protective factors, when we say there's 19 items, if a family is filling out the retrospective, it ends up being 38 items because the retrospective asks their feelings before and now. So it's the same question and it's before and now. And we'll look at the retrospective, what that looks like in a little bit, but just want to clarify that because you're going to ask the same question twice in the retrospective. Another version that's available with the PFS2, and this is new to the second edition, is the standalone concrete support subscale. And this is what I was mentioning earlier. You can use this to get a snapshot of the family and what their needs are related to concrete supports. You can use this as a standalone, especially if you're going to be using the retrospective survey where the family's only completing it at the end of service. You may want to use this concrete support at the beginning just to get a picture of what's happening with the family and give you a little snapshot of what's going on. So we'll get into this more. I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. I do want to mention too, we are currently in process of a field test for the Spanish version of the second edition. So the PFS2 itself in English is valid, it's reliable. You can read about it up on the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse. The Spanish version, we are still field testing. However, we do have it available. So if you are interested in using the Spanish version, let me know. You can reach out to me and we will have it available in the database as well. All we ask is that you are willing to share what your findings are and your data with the researchers so that they can use it as part of the field test right now. So we've got a lot more information about what that entails and what that looks like. But if you're planning to use a PFS2, you'd like the Spanish version, please reach out. We can get you connected to start using that because it's not widely available yet, but you are welcome to use it. So one question that we did receive that I want to get to here, we had a question about whether it's possible to use the individual components of this survey as you're administering it, if you wanted to pull out one of the different subscales in the survey and use that. And what I will tell you first and foremost, if you are using the database for the protective factor survey, it doesn't allow for separate subscales. The whole survey's in there. You can't pick and choose which of the protective factor subscales you want it to administer. When a family receives a link to go in and put their information in the database, they're going to get the whole survey there. So if they don't answer all the questions, that's okay, but you can't pick and choose the subscales. There is the option, of course, as I mentioned, with the concrete support subscale, that is a standalone by itself, but the rest of the survey is all together. And even when you go on our website and you download it and look at it, it's all one. We don't have it separated up by protective factor or by subscale to be used that way. But knowing that there are some of your programs where you might not have as much interest in one of the subscales, you still can have families fill that out, but when you are looking at your data and analyzing your data, that might not be a subscale that you're analyzing for, but the survey is set up all together to have all of them together, and you can't really pull them out and do them separately. But like I mentioned, that concrete when you can. So we'll look at that in a moment. So just a reminder for those of you that may be newer to the protective factors, we always just like to share what this looks like. We know that many of your programs are implementing the protective factors. You may be addressing one or more of these, and you can really use the protective factor survey to help measure the impact of your program in these different areas of protective factors and looking at your participants' protective factors. So just always like to share this graphic back. If you want to learn more about each individual protective factor, you heard Dana talking at the beginning about upcoming trainings that they have both in April and in the future that look at individual protective factors. I know the email that you'll receive from Dana afterwards is going to have some links to access previous recordings around trainings that are just on the protective factors. At Friends, we have trainings on the protective factors as well. You'll find that on that same webpage that I showed you. We have an online learning center with an online free course around them. There are a lot of resources for the protective factors, also through CSSP, who we heard Dana mention before. That's where this graphic comes from, and the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. So a lot of places, if you're looking to get to know about the protective factors themselves, because today I'm going to talk about the survey, but if you really want to know more about these, you've got a lot of options. And I would say your first step could be Caltrin, because they've got good resources for you on those. So speaking of protective factors, let's talk about the protective factors that each of these surveys measure, because this might be, first of all, a way for you to decide which survey to use if you haven't decided yet. But if you are going to be using one of these surveys, it's important that you, as a staff member administering this with families, understands what protective factors are going to be measured and the questions that you're going to be asking of the participants as you administer the survey. So if you're using the original protective factor survey, this one is measuring family functioning and resiliency, social emotional support, nurturing and attachment, knowledge of parent and child development, and concrete supports. So this is from the original one. These are the 5 subscales that the protective factor survey looks at. However, things look a little bit different when we move and look at the revised, the PFS2 protective factor survey. And we're seeing a lot more programs using the PFS2 right now. And so that's why I'm going to go a little bit deeper into this today to really talk about what it looks like using the PFS2. But you will notice that it's different. And you'll see that there is a new protective factor here for this second edition, which is the caregiver-practitioner relationship. We've got it bolded and starred there. And just a note, and I think I mentioned this earlier, but some of your programs might not place importance on all of these, or use these all for the data you're collecting or the data that you might be reporting. And that's okay. But if there's certain ones of these that your program's really interested in, the survey is going to get you the information to show your program's impact on these protective factors. So just wanted to let you know about that. But let's take a look at what it really means, these protective factors that are measured in the PFS2. So the first one's family functioning and resilience. And this is looking at how the family has adaptive skills and strategies to persevere in times of crisis. And there's a lot going on in the world right now. And so being able to see how the family adapts to what's happening, whether it's their own crisis within their family or what's happening out in our communities. It's also the family's ability to openly share positive and negative experiences and mobilize to accept, solve, and manage problems. The next one here is social supports. This is perceived informal support. And we talk about this for the families we work with, but it's also helpful sometimes to think about it for ourselves. But that informal support can be family, friends, neighbors that help provide for emotional needs and that social aspect that families and people really need. The next one here is nurturing and attachment. This is the emotional tie along with the pattern of that positive interaction between the parent and the child that really develops over time as the child themselves is developing and growing up. The new one for the PFS2 here is the caregiver practitioner relationship. This is that supportive, understanding relationship between you all as a practitioner and the caregiver. And it positively affects parent success in participating in services. It's that trust and that rapport that is developed with the families that you are seeing and providing services to. And then finally, here's the concrete supports, which is the perceived access to tangible goods and services to help families cope with stress, particularly in times of need, of crisis, or intensified need. And this concrete supports is something, as I've been doing training in TA over the last few years within the pandemic times, we've noticed that this one is one of the bigger protective factors that families really need support and help with, and that programs are really exploring how they can enhance these concrete supports for families. So I'm sure a lot of you have thought about that. This survey will help you measure that with families. So I do want to note that unlike the original protective factor survey that we were just looking at, this second edition does not measure knowledge of child development or parenting. And let's explore why that is, because if you happen to be using the first one, you are going to be looking at that. However, if you're using the second edition, you won't be measuring child development and knowledge of parenting. So if this is something your program really does want to measure, you're going to maybe want to explore using the original one. But let's talk about this and why both child development, knowledge of parenting, and social emotional competence of children are not measured in the PFS2. And that really is because the knowledge of parenting and child development is that complex construct with many different components to it. And it's not always an accurate reflection of true parenting knowledge. It's really hard to capture, and it's sort of a moving conflict, or not conflict, but construct. And some of this can be reflected in responses in the other subscales on the survey. And so it just wasn't something that they felt fit well with the second edition. So if you are doing programs where you do want to measure this, perhaps you're doing parent education services or things like that, you might want to explore other tools related to what you're doing. Like if you're offering a curriculum, maybe there's a measurement tool with that curriculum that you might want to explore so that you still can measure child development and knowledge of parenting, because that won't be measured in the protective factors second edition. And here too, you see we've noted social and emotional competence of children, because this again is that complex construct, and it really varies based on the age of the child. And it also sometimes measures perception, which is a hard thing to measure and not really accurate. So instead, we do have some tools available to measure this protective factor. If you go to our friend's website, you're going to hear me say that a lot because we have such good tools up there. Under the evaluation section, we have a compendium of annotated tools that you can go up there and take a look at other tools that might help you measure this protective factor if that's one that you're interested in. So I want to pause for a moment. I'm not sure if there's any questions that have come up in the chat. Jennifer or Dana.
We have not seen any so far, but if anybody would like to raise a hand, this is a great time.
Okay. And please, I'm not sure that we really mentioned that at the beginning, but if you have questions throughout this, feel free to put that in the chat, especially if it's relevant to what I'm talking about in that moment. I don't want you to feel that you have to hold that all the way till the end. I'm happy to pause and answer questions that may come up right in the moment. If there's something that you're like, oh my gosh, I really want to know that, please jump in, put it in the chat. And I think Dana will interrupt me and give it to me, which is great and totally fine. So you're welcome to do that. So want to go a little bit deeper into how you understand what the retrospective is versus the traditional PFS2. And this is especially important if you're going to be using the retrospective survey, because I'll be honest with you all, I wasn't that familiar with them until I really dove deeper into this protective factor survey in the retrospective version. And so if you haven't used a retrospective before, this is a great way for you to get to know it and to understand why it is beneficial. A lot of programs are choosing to use this retrospective version. So what do we mean when we say retrospective? Really, a retrospective allows for reflection and for participants to think back as to how far they've come with your services. So a retrospective survey is administered once at the end of the service delivery, normally when you would give a post test. So if you're doing a pre and a post and you're about to give the post test, you would do a retrospective if you hadn't done a pre-test and had decided to do retrospective instead. You do that at the end of survey. And the way it works, the way it works is participants are asked to think back and answer what they felt or experienced before they started the program. And that's why it's called a retrospective and a reflective, because you are looking back at what you were feeling before. And then they answer based on what they feel or experience now after completing your program. And I do want to make a note that it really is best if participants have received a minimum of 12 hours of services in order to use the retrospective survey. And this is really because if there's less than 12 hours of services, you won't see statistically significant change. And if you're doing program evaluation, that's important. You want to see that change, and less than 12 hours doesn't really work for the retrospective. And so I want to mention that, and I'm going to take a minute to pull this up and show you, first of all, where you can find it, but also what it looks like for those of you that may not have seen a retrospective survey before. So I'm back here on our Friends Protective Factors page. And when we scroll down, we haven't gone in here yet, but I'm going to click on where it says PFS2. This is where you can find the traditional PFS2 survey. It's also where you can find the retrospective. So let's take a look at this. Again, you have the program information pages at the beginning, but I want to show you what the survey itself actually looks like. Up to this. So you'll see in the retrospective, it asks before and now for each question. And that's that reflective piece where the participants will look back. So when it says the future looks good for our family, they're going to think about before they came to your services and market. And then now, what does that look like in market here? And so this is what a retrospective looks like. And that's why I said the retrospective survey is actually 38 items, because you have the before and now in here, but they're stacked up right next to each other. Very easy still to complete here for each of the questions on this 5-point scale, because the PFS2 is down to 5 instead of 7 on the 5-point scale. So here we go. I'm not going to walk through all of these, but wanted to just so you know what it looks like before and now on the survey. And again, just download this if you're interested up under PFS2 on our webpage. I just went and shared the exact same thing with you all again. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. So that gives you an idea. You've seen what this survey looks like if you haven't seen one of those before. But why would you want to administer retrospectively? What's the benefit of it? Well, it yields 100% match between pre and post. So when you're looking at data and you want to analyze your data, if you have a retrospective survey, you've got the pre and post right there. Whereas if you are administering a traditional pre and post, sometimes there's participant drop off. So collecting a post test, you might not be able to get everybody that completed the pre-test, but with the retrospective, you'll have everything there in one place for the match pre and post test. It also is less burden on both the participant and on your staff because you're only administering it once. Whereas if you do a pre and a post, you're doing the pre-test as the participants coming in within the first or second session with them, and then you'll do it again at the end. And that does take time for you to administer that. So it does reduce the burden for both of you there. It also allows for staff to have the opportunity to develop trust and rapport with the participants. So when you're doing it retrospectively, the participants have been through the services, whether it is that they are participating in a class or home visiting or case management, whatever the service is, and there is more rapport with you, and they will be more willing to kind of share their personal information on the tool, and they're feeling a little bit more comfortable and understanding of the services that your program offers and that they have received. Now, the retrospective may be administered at any time during services. As I mentioned, you want to have that minimum of 12 hours, but if you are seeing a participant for an extended period of time, you may want to administer this at different increments throughout your time with them. So if you've got participants that you may have for a year or two, your program can decide, you know what? Let's do the retrospective survey at 3-month intervals or 6-month intervals or whatever that could look like. So you can do it during service and more than once to get some data points and get some information from your participants. And the retrospective also reduces the likelihood of response shift bias, where participants' knowledge change throughout the course of service delivery may result in overrating at pretest. So if you have a participant that comes in and perhaps maybe they haven't received services like yours before, and they are unsure of where they're at and what your services are, they may not quite know how to answer truthfully for themselves or correctly. And so they might just answer hi at the beginning and give themselves great scores on the survey right at the beginning. But then once they've been through the services and participate in things, they realize, oh, well, maybe we still need to work on some things. And so when they do the post test, all of a sudden their scores are lower, and that doesn't look good for your program evaluation. So retrospective can help eliminate those issues as they're just doing it once they're more familiar with both themselves and with your program. So there are some things to consider when it comes to doing a retrospective survey. The first of it is the ability to recall feelings or experiences prior to services is influenced by the length of services. So that's why I mentioned you do have that option of doing the retrospective at certain time intervals if you're going to see someone for a long period of time. Because if you start seeing a family and you see them for 2 years and you give them the retrospective only after that 2 years, I mean, I can't remember how I was doing for a lot of things 2 years ago, and so considering that is something to think about, and how often you may want to give it to them. The retrospective is also subject to social desirability bias. And, this may be that participants rate themselves highly at post-test because they really, really want to show you have helped them and they've got positive change as a result of coming to your services, and they want to make you feel good and show that the services were effective, but that they might not be as high as they're rating themselves, but they're doing it just to show that positive result. So this could happen as well, especially if you do have real good rapport, and they think that, oh, we have to show that we're doing good in order for my service provider to look good too. That can happen with the retrospective. And then I want to talk about this concrete supports. With the retrospective, that means that you're only measuring the concrete supports at post-test if you're just giving the retrospective then, but you can use the standalone concrete support subscale at the beginning of service. This will give you a snapshot of the family needs, especially now knowing that concrete supports are sort of a high priority for a lot of families, and it's an additional data point. So if you want that concrete support information on a family, you can use the concrete support subscale and just do that with the family, and then the actual retrospective at the end or at different points during your service with them. So that's the retrospective survey. I encourage you to go and look at it, especially if you want to familiarize yourself with what that looks like. You can download it right there on our website and get a better understanding of how that works. Let's go into the traditional pre-post. And I think a lot of people are familiar with these. We've done these for, I think sometimes even for these trainings where you'll answer some questions at the beginning before you come to a training or a webinar, and then you answer them at the end to see what the knowledge change has been. That is an example of a pre and post test. So the protective factor survey, both the original and the second, have these pre-posts, and they're administered at the beginning and the end. They establish that baseline measure, and the post-test measures the changes in protective factors. You can also do a post-test during service provision to see if participants' needs have changed. So it's similar to the retrospective. If you have a longer term participant group, you might want to administer that post-test at different times. So as you're thinking about using either of these surveys with families, whether it's pre-post or the retrospective, think about how long you tend to see your participants and when would be a good time to administer that. So some things to consider with the traditional pre and post, again, as I mentioned, suited for longer term clients. So you can have ongoing data collection. It helps with your reporting and things for your program. It is administered twice, so it takes a little bit more time from your staff. You want to make sure that participants have enough time to complete both the pre and the post. And then you do the ceiling effect where they might rate themselves highly at the beginning of services. We talked about this, and then leaving no room for improvement at the end, and that doesn't look good for your program evaluation. So we're about to go into actually using the survey with families, but I want to give you some resources, and you saw this when I pulled up our website. Here's the actual website address, but you can go to friendsnrc.org and toggle over to evaluation to get all of this. But we have the user manuals for both surveys up there. We also, as I showed you, can download both the original or the PFS2, any of their surveys, the pre-post, the retrospective, all the surveys are up there for free on our website. You don't even have to enter in your information to download the survey. You can just go up there, download it right down there as a PDF. There's also a little section on choosing between the retrospective or the traditional PFS2, if that's something that you're still trying to figure out. But this is what our website looks like. And now we want to get into actually administering the survey with families. But I do want to pause to see if there's any questions that you all have as we're about to get into this.
We don't have any questions in the chat, but if anyone has questions, feel free to enter them in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand.
Yes, please. We're happy to answer any questions. So no matter which version you use, the original PFS, the second edition, a retrospective, pre-post, we have a manual and a script for you. We have outlined it all to make it as easy as possible for you to be able to use this survey. And for there to be consistency within your programs. If you have multiple staff members using it, we've got consistency for you all to use it the same way. So I do want to talk about a little bit of how you can support staff, whether you're a manager or supporting your peers in survey administration. And so one of the most important things is to have clear administration protocols, including clear timelines. So clear administration protocols, first of all, means that all of your staff know that they have to administer the survey with families. This is the tool your program's using. It'll be used with how all the participants that come in, or if you decided to use it for specific programs, it's clearly outlined who's using the survey and when it needs to be used. And that is up to your program to decide. But make sure everybody's familiar and knows the timeline. So if folks know that, oh, we see families for a longer amount of time, we know the timeline is every 3 months we do a retrospective, or every 6 months we do the post test. So make sure it's clear before your staff gets into actually using the survey with families. It's really helpful to know that. One thing, and we actually heard this, the last training we did, one of the programs from LA County that's using the protective factors survey said that they do this, and I think it's a great idea, is consider having staff take the survey themselves. Now, you're not going to put their survey data in with your participant data, but just have the staff take the survey so that they understand it and they know the questions and they know how the scoring works. There's some reverse scoring on there. And so just so you know how it looks and what it feels like for each question, it can be really helpful. And you can do this in several ways. If you want to do a peer-to-peer thing where they're asking each other, and I'm going to talk in a little bit about how to do face-to-face administration. Or you can have them take it just on their own and fill it out and see how it feels. But whatever that is, I think that's a great suggestion, is to take the survey themselves. When you have new staff that comes on, it's also helpful to kind of train the new staff that may not be able to participate in any of these trainings. They can take the survey themselves and get a better feel for it. And we also want to encourage patience and understanding as a staff person as you are administering the survey, because it's not going to be the same with every participant that you go and administer the survey with, for a multitude of reasons. There will be some folks where there's a language barrier because we only have this in Spanish and English. And if you're translating it for a family that speaks another language, you know, that is going to take some extra time. You're going to need to have some patience. There's probably not some direct translation as you're speaking another language. So kind of figuring that out, you need to have some patience around that. Also understanding of families that they may feel a little uncomfortable with some of the questions. And I will go into that later about what to do with some of the sensitive questions and how you can handle some of that. But you really need to have patience and understanding with the families and not just have this be another form they're filling out, but really take the time for that comfort and to help them. And practicing the language and facilitation. I'm going to give you a script in a little bit. You want to practice that and make sure that you are comfortable with that, especially if you're going to be using the retrospective because it's a little different. You want to be sure you're familiar with that language and how to facilitate that with families. And then it's great if your whole program is using this survey with families, have some time in staff meetings to talk about it. It doesn't have to be every staff meeting, but maybe every quarter you have something on the agenda where you check in and say, you know, how is survey administration going? What questions do you have? What concerns do you have? And of course, when you bring on new staff, you want to have some more dedicated time for this. This will all help you be successful in using this survey with families. And I do want to share a resource around the protective factors themselves, because a lot of folks may not have been to protective factors trainings or learned a lot about the protective factors. And so this is a resource that some of you may have seen before. This comes from the Prevention Resource Guide. So if you are familiar with the Prevention Resource Guide, in there, and there's going to be a new guide coming out in the next couple of months. Right now, I'm showing you the 2021-2022 Prevention Resource Guide. The next one should be out hopefully within the next couple of months. They're finalizing it right now. But this one is perfect for you to use. This is up on the childwelfare.gov website. Honestly, you can just Google Prevention Resource Guide, Child Welfare, and you'll find it. But chapter 6 of this guide is around protective factors conversation guides for partnering with families. And there's information about how to talk about the protective factors with families. So it may be helpful if you are not as familiar about protective factors and having these conversations, just to refer back to these guides, or just about having a conversation with families about the different protective factors. So I won't make you all dizzy by scrolling through this, but I wanted to give this to you as a resource, an additional resource to support your staff in talking about protective factors and leading up to doing the survey with families. So just a couple of other tips as we think about doing this. There may be times where there's incentives for survey completion, and that's something your program can decide. And one of the suggestions we've heard that instead of giving an incentive for actually filling out a survey, you have survey completion be combined with something else that might be an incentive. If you are providing a meal for something, or you're having an event, and part of that time could be completing the survey.
Hey,
that's the way to
don't scare her. She's wanting to say hi.
I'm so sorry. I keep getting muted here. Hopefully I'm back. Okay. So yeah, connecting survey completion with other things can help get better results of amount of people completing surveys. So at events or with other things that may be happening within your program. You may also want to follow up with families that perhaps missed doing their pretest, or weren't there when you were planning to administer a post-test or a retrospective. Just check in with them. For those of you that are going to be using the database, you'll be able to send a link directly to families. So you don't necessarily even need to have them there. You'll be sending a link out to families to complete the survey. And so if you notice that they haven't completed the survey, you're going to want to follow up and check in with them as well. So just that extra touch point sometimes. I mean, if we all think in our own lives, how many surveys we get, you go to the doctor and you get a survey, and you go to different things and you get surveys all the time. And so a lot of them slip through the cracks, or for me personally, I'm like, oh, I'll get to that later. I'm busy right now. And then I forget about it. So sometimes having a reminder to complete a survey is helpful as well. So just some other things to think about when you are getting ready or administering the survey with families. A lot of this I talked about already, but it's helpful to have it on its own slide, and you all have a copy of this. So I wanted it to be on one slide as a reminder about when you would administer the survey, whether you're using the original or the second edition. So if you are doing a pre-post, if you're using the traditional version, you want to administer the pre-test as close to the start of services as possible. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the very first thing. You don't want people to walk in the door and you hand them a survey and a piece of paper before you've even said hello and talked about your programs, but as close to as possible. If it is the second time you meet with them, that's okay. But you want it to be towards the beginning. And when we talk about, services, programs, curriculum, it can be anything that your program may be offering, whether it is case management or home visiting, whether it is parents as teachers, or any type of different programs like that. It's all encompassing here. Now, if you're using the retrospective survey, you can administer that concrete support subscale at the beginning, again, as a data point for the family. And as I mentioned earlier, you want to administer the survey, the post or the retrospective survey at the end of services when there's been at least 12 hours of service. And now we've had some questions about what hours of service means. And again, that's sort of up to your program to determine, but we look at that as like home visits. So if you're doing home visiting and each home visit's an hour, it would be 12 home visits. If you're doing a program participation and each class or whatever folks are coming to is 2 hours, then it would be 6 classes. And there's a little wiggle room in that, depending on what your services are and how you define hours of service. But this is our recommendation for at least 12 hours of service. And as I mentioned, you can decide if you want to administer this at different intervals. So just wanted to make sure you had this all on one slide that you can refer back to later. So let's get into actually using the survey with families. And there are several ways to administer this, no matter what version you're using. And the first way is face-to-face, good old face-to-face, which we are getting back to seeing people in person, which is great. And so being able to do face-to-face is really nice to have that trust and rapport with the participants that you see. And the face-to-face administration can be more of a conversation instead of just, here's a survey, here's the question, you can have a bit more conversation with it, especially like when you're using the retrospective and you ask one of the questions, you can say, so before, how was this for you? And now how, and you can make it a bit more of a conversation. This can help limit one-word responses. It can help clarify if there's confusion around a question, especially if you do happen to have to help with translation or other things around this. This is helpful for the face-to-face. And even if you, no matter what version, if you're using the paper version or the database version, you can still do this face-to-face, whether you as the service provider is writing the information or putting it into the database, or if you have the family themselves filling out the survey or putting their information in the database, you can still talk with them about it as that is happening. That's a one-on-one. Then another way you can do it is by having the participant fill it out on their own with assistance available. So you're there. A lot of times we see this maybe in like a class. If you are doing some sort of a class and you're having everybody complete the survey at the same time. So the participants filling it out or doing it on their phone with the database, but you're there in the room in case they might need some help or have a question about something. So this certainly is another way to do it. Electronically is a way that we see, especially with the database now, because you can just, and Edie's going to get into this in a couple of weeks as she does more database trainings. And there's information about this on our website in the database section, but you can text or email a link for participants to fill out the survey electronically right into the database. And that's another way to administer it as well. And that can happen without program staff present. That can, they can fill it out at home, or if they're at work or out with their kids somewhere, whenever they have the time and have the link, they can do that. But you also can have them do that while you're there in person. So either way, there's a lot of options with this. Now, some of the other options are phone or mail. You can certainly do phone, and we've seen phone happen for people who may not have internet access. This survey is being used up in Alaska, which is rural up there. And there are areas where their internet access is not great. And it's easier for them to be on the phone to talk that through and answer the questions over the phone. So you certainly can do that. That does take time for both the staff and the family to do that together. But it's similar to the face-to-face, but you're on the phone and just not, looking at each other. The other way to do it is by mail. Don't recommend this, and I can't imagine many people are doing this anymore anyway. But when you send the survey via mail to somebody, you don't have any ability to control the environment or know that the intended person is the one who filled out the survey. We know mail gets lost a lot and disappears, or other people get their hands on it. So mail is not the opportune way to do this, but if that is the last and only way, it can be done if you print the survey out and mail it to somebody and have them either bring it back in or mail it back to you. So just some quick tips if you're doing that face-to-face and you're with somebody. And some of these tips are also just for any way that you're doing it. If you're sending a link to people for the database or whatever that is, you want to tell them ahead of time that you will be doing this survey and letting them know so that they don't come in and immediately have a piece of paper shoved in their face or whatever that looks like. And it could be that when they come in, you say, we're going to do a survey in a little bit, but let's chat first about some other things, but making sure they know that the survey is going to happen. And if you are using the database and you're going to send them a link to the database, you want to make sure they know that's coming, because I know you get some junk and spam texts and emails. And if I just get a link, and from a random number, I'm not clicking on it. You don't know what's happening. So you want to be sure that people are aware of that the survey is coming to them or that they're going to be completing it. And of course, you want to use consistent procedures. You want to follow the script, which I'll share in a minute, but also use the procedures that your agency and program have outlined for you. And that's why I mentioned earlier, it's so important to actually have kind of program protocols around the survey and how it's used. You want to provide adequate time for questions as well. Now, depending on the survey and who's taking it, like you can do it in 10 to 15 minutes average. However, as I mentioned, there's people that are going to need more time for that. And also consider the environment. Like if you are trying to do the survey with a parent who's got their kids around and there's going to be interruptions and other things, you want to make sure that you have enough time and aren't bumping up to something else where either you as a staff person or the family is going to need to leave in the middle of it. You really want to get this done all at once, and not do the survey in little chunks. You want to do it all at one time. You also want to avoid influencing responses. So if you're doing this in person and the participant's looking at you like, I don't know what this means, or I don't know how I should answer this, you want to just keep talking to them about what the question is, and you don't want to influence their answer. So if they tell you an answer for something, you don't want to say correct or that's great. You don't want to influence any of their answers, because that might influence how they answer the rest of the survey, which might not be accurate. So be sure to avoid that. And if there's any challenges to the survey completion, whether that is language or if a question was confusing, please make note of that. Talk about that with your staff. And if it's something that you're hearing from a lot of people, that's something for us at Friends to know that we can share with the researchers. That is how come we ended up with a second edition and a revised edition, because we really heard from all of you in the field that original protective factor survey, there were some things that were challenging with it. And that's why there was a revision. And especially for those of you that may end up using the second edition of the survey right now in Spanish during the field test, we certainly want to hear about any challenges as we're still in the field testing phase. But of course, if things come up, we want to know, and your staff can help you talk through that as well. So you want to prepare when you're going to be doing the survey with families and make sure that you as a staff member is equipped and ready to go. So you'll have the script, which I'll show you how to find it and what that looks like in a minute. And you want to make sure that all staff that's using it within your organization are using the same script and consistent procedures. You've got clear administration protocols. And so everybody knows what's happening. And then you want to practice. And I mentioned this earlier. We heard about one of the other grantees that actually practiced on their own first. If you decide you want to do that, but at least practice looking through the scripts before you talk with the family. And so you're not stumbling over things and unclear of exactly what it says. And you want to really understand the purpose of the survey, so you can share that information with the participants so that they know this survey isn't about collecting their individual data and getting information just on them as an individual, but it's really about your program evaluation and bettering your program and understanding how your program is offering services to families. So when you understand that, and then the families you work with understand that, it's helpful and can ease you into administering the survey with them. So before you go and do the survey, you may want to designate a staff member that's responsible for preparing the materials. So especially if you are not using the database, but you are using a paper version of the survey, you want to make sure everybody is using the same survey. And whether that's printing it out from the website or whatever that looks like, sometimes it's helpful to have that one dedicated person kind of in charge of making sure that you've got the correct survey and the information. And one thing I will tell you, if you are using a paper version, please print it directly. Don't make copies upon copies upon copies of the survey. It's much harder to read. It's already kind of small font. And so always download it from our website or save it on your computer and print a new one instead of making all those copies and making it harder to read. And you want to make sure you've got copies of it ahead of time, that all the pages are there. I know sometimes my printer eats a page or two, so just check through that before you go to do the survey. Make sure that there's space available for you to do it as well. If you're going to do face-to-face, that you have a quiet space. You're not sitting in the lobby as other families are coming into your center and people are hearing these sensitive questions being asked, but that you've got private space for that and that you have enough time. So I mentioned can take approximately 10 to 15 minutes, but for some families, it could take much longer. Other families can be done in 5 in a jiff, and you just don't know. So you want to make sure that you've got the time to do that and you're not running to another appointment or anything. And then, as you saw when I showed the survey earlier, you're not writing participant names on the survey. You are using a participant ID, and these IDs your program and organization will create. They can be anything. Some programs do it, if it's a larger agency and then they have several programs using the survey, each program may have different participant IDs that start with different numbers or whatever that is. It's up to you all to choose your participant ID number. It doesn't have to be a certain amount of numbers or anything like that, but you want to make sure that you have the different IDs matched with their names somewhere so that you can, when you go to, like if you're doing a pre and post test, let's say you have a Sarah Smith and you did a pre-test with her and her client ID is 123. When you go to do the post test with her, you're going to want to write her client ID on the post test. You need to know what that was from the pre-test. You need to know that Sarah was 123. So somewhere you've got that information saved, and many of you may already have participant IDs that you use for other stuff. You certainly can keep using that for these, but just make sure you have that list somewhere so that you are able to access that and know your client IDs so that you can have your match pre and post tests. So you'll prepare your materials. And again, if you have a designated staff person that's helping with that, this is somewhere where they can help you too. So you either will download the survey from our website, or if you get it out of the user manual, which is also on our website, either place, or if you're using the database, you'll access it through the database, and those instructions are up in our database user manual. So there's several different ways to get that survey and have it ready to use with families. And then you'll assemble the packet. So if you are doing it in person, you'll have what's at the front of the survey, which is a program information form. If your program has any sort of informed consent, you'll want to have them fill that out too if they haven't done that already. We don't offer that up, but if you have that, please go ahead and have them fill it out. And then you want to make sure you've got the whole survey itself ready to go. And you want to make sure that if you're using the database, but you have decided to go out and use a paper version to meet with somebody, maybe you're going somewhere where there's no internet or they prefer the paper version to the electronic, you want to make sure that the survey that you are taking to fill out with them in person on paper matches what you're going to be putting back into, whether it's our database, the Protective Factors database, or some of you may have your own databases, but you want to make sure that it's matching up like the demographic information and stuff that you're collecting. So that's, again, a good place for someone who might be in charge of like heading up your surveys for your organization. That's something they too can help you with to make sure that you're using the right survey that matches up with the information that you're collecting. So you've got to look at the survey already. On the very front page is where the program information form is. So you'll put, if you have an agency ID, if you don't, it's not required. but you do need to have a participant ID. You can ignore the agency ID if you want to, but you will need a participant ID that you'll either write on here if you are writing, or you'll type it into the database if you're doing this in the database. So if you are using the database, it will understand if you put only a concrete support subscale in as a pretest, and then you're going to be doing the retrospective later. So just want to mention that on the database. If you happen to be using that, if not, don't worry about it. But this is what the program information form looks like on the front of the service. When it talks about here, the program start date, this is when the participant started services. And so even if it's not the day that you give them the survey, if you're doing a pre-post, maybe you're giving them the pre-test on your second meeting with them, you still want to put their actual start date, even if you're not administering the survey that day. This is the same for if you're doing the retrospective. You want to put the date that they started services there. So you may have to look back through your files or through your own databases to remember that, but that's an important thing to note, that it's the date that they actually started service. So this is a little bit more about the first page of the survey. What I just showed you, the program information form, you'll fill all that out, and then you actually remove the program information form before you hand the survey to the family. So that's kind of your internal agency information. Now, if somebody's doing it over the database, they won't see that form, you don't have to worry about it. But if you're using a paper form with them, you'll remove the top program information form so that they don't see it. That's just for you. They don't need to know, all the information that's on there about your agency and other stuff. So when you're administering, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm talking about the PFS2 here, but it really is the same administration for both the original and the second edition. It was just easier to choose one of them to talk about here. So you'll administer it. You will hand over a device to participants if you're face-to-face, or hand them the paper survey, or you'll send them the link if they're going to complete it via the database without the program information. You too want to make sure your participant ID numbers match the participant. If you are going to use the database, it is an individual link for each participant. So if you want to, let's say you've got a parenting group of 9 parents, and it's time for everybody to take their post-test or their retrospective survey at the end of class, you cannot use the same link for each person because it's connected to that unique ID. So you need a unique link to the database for each person to complete their own survey. So that also goes for if you're passing out the survey in a class, making sure their participant ID goes to the person that ID is assigned to, and you're not just handing surveys out to everybody. So very important. That's part of the tracking piece that you need to be careful about. That part of having a protocol in place will help you keep track of. So once you've got the survey ready to go, you've got the participant ID, you're giving it to the right person, you are then going to introduce the survey to participants. So I'm going to share an example of what it would look like for you to be doing it, if you're doing it face-to-face or in a group setting or over the phone. This is a script and how you're going to use it. It's going to look a little different if you're sending them a link. You're still going to use this information, but this is really for the face-to-face, how you use this in person as you're doing the survey. So both the PFS original user manual available up on our website and the PFS2 user manual have the scripts in the manual. And you want to look over it every time you're administering the survey. After a while, you're going to get comfortable with this and you're going to know what to say for administering the survey. But certainly at the beginning, you want to make sure you review this and make sure you're familiar with it and the general instructions, and also the version specific instructions if you're doing pre-post versus retrospective. So we're going to talk about the PFS2 and how you introduce the survey to participants. And again, this script is available in that user manual up on our website. And it's all right there, but you're going to introduce them to the survey, talking about how you're going to complete a survey. This part of it too helps inform the participant about why you're collecting the information. It's helping you better understand the needs of the families you serve, talks about the questions. And I think the second bullet is the one that's really important. And you want to make sure that you share this with families before you ask them to complete the survey. And it's that they're not going to lose services or be penalized in any way if they prefer not to complete the survey or if they don't answer some of the questions. It's okay. You're not going to be, the survey is not determining if they get to come to your services or not. So make sure they're aware of that and that you tell them that so that they feel a little bit more comfortable, especially if you're doing the pre-test at the beginning and they don't know you so well. That's a really important thing to tell them. And of course, the last bullet, that all the information will be confidential. They're not putting their name anywhere. This isn't anything that has to worry about HIPAA. We're not collecting any of that type of personal information. So it's just, it is confidential, and there's not going to be a leak of, their address, their name, birth dates, things like that. And again, reminding them the services they receive are not negatively affected by any answers they give us. And you do want to check in if they have any questions. And I will tell you, it's okay for participants to skip questions, even if you're using the database. The database doesn't require an answer for the actual survey for every little thing in there. So if somebody skips a question in the database, it's okay. If they skip a question on the paper survey that you may give them, it's okay. Especially if there are some items that just aren't relevant. If you are working with someone who is pregnant but doesn't have children yet, they can't answer some questions about their children and things like that. It's okay for them to skip and reassure people that that is the case. So after you've introduced the survey to participants, you want to review the general instructions with participants using this script that is in the user manual. And it talks about the different sections that they'll need to complete. It explains them in a little bit more detail. So the first section asks about their parent experiences and general outlook on life. And we've built into the script how you're reminding them that it's not a test, or no right or wrong answers, everything's confidential. These are things we reiterate in the script to help families really understand that. And the thing that you want to be sure they know is they should choose the answer that makes the most sense for you and your family. So it's for them, it's about their family. They're not taking a test that's like graded or anything like that. It's really choosing the answer that makes the most sense for their family. Then you tell them about the second section, which is their background information and their families. And that can be customized for your different programs, and if you use a database, you'll see how you can do that. But that's just background information on number of children and things like that. So you explain to them about the survey. And again, you want to do this no matter what version you're using, just so that the participants are comfortable with it. And then you'll go into the actual script for the specific version that you're using. And here I've included the retrospective just because that's a little bit more of the trickier one to explain to participants. And this is really how you explain what it looks like. And you talk to them about how the questions, and I showed you this on our website at the beginning. I know it seems like a long time ago, but you remember it said before and now for each question for them to be able to answer. So you let the participant know that each question asks you to answer for before or now. You think back to when you started the program, answer the questions based on how you felt, what you experienced before you started the program. And then you answer the same question for how you feel or what you experience now as you're sitting here and completing this now. And you may have to remind them of this throughout. They might get going on a couple of questions and then get stumped, and just remind them, how did you feel before you came to our program, and how are you feeling now, so that they understand what that looks like. You let them know the questions, ask them to think about how much or how little each item reflects their life, but how often they may be experiencing something. And if they're filling it out themselves, you let them know how to mark it. And there may be times where families are like, I'm not sure any of these answers are close enough to what we are. And you ask them to say, what do you think is the closest answer? Maybe one of them's not spot on to your family, but mark the one that comes the closest. And then when they're finished with the survey, they hand it back to you or give you back a device or whatever that looks like. But let them know at any time if they have questions that you can help them, and let them know if they've got anything that they can reach out. If they're doing it not with you, or if they are doing it with you, they can just ask you in person. So you'll have them begin to take the survey. The one thing I want to share with you here on this slide, if participants have questions, encourage them to answer the survey questions in a way that makes the most sense for them or their family. Sometimes participants are going to turn to you and kind of hope that you, as their provider, might be able to kind of help them answer or give them the best answer, but that's not what you're there for. And so we recommend that staff respond to questions using the following script. I don't have any additional information, just respond in a way that makes the most sense for you, your family, your life. Reminder that there are no right or wrong answers. So just answer the way that feels best for your family. And if you have to keep repeating that, you may have to, as participants might look at you for their answers, but just remind them there's no right or wrong. This isn't like a test that they take at school or anything. And then once they finish the survey, they'll give it back to you and you'll collect it. And whether you're going back and entering it into your own database, or if you're just giving it to a data analysis person, your own individual program will determine how you are doing the data collection once you've administered this. So I mentioned earlier that you may have some sensitive questions, and sometimes the questions that the survey asks of participants can be of that sensitive nature. And you might also get some pushback sometimes from participants as you're doing this survey, especially if you don't know them that well, you don't have rapport with them. So how can you handle getting pushback or them, having an issue with a sensitive question? These are a few strategies that you might want to consider when you're administering the survey with families. And I do want to note, like, if needed, if you really get something that is sensitive to the family, you can then pause the survey administration and bring in a supervisor or check in with somebody. If the sensitivity of something, or if a client is having an issue with something on there and it's really prohibitive of them completing the survey, you don't want to push them to keep going on. But here are a couple of tips for you to handling those sensitive questions. You want to address them openly. So this might mean you're going back to the script again and explaining why the information is necessary. It's for your program evaluation, and talk to them about how the data will be used. And we're not, these are confidential. We're not collecting the sensitive information. And you might have to remind them a few times of some of the information that I just read to you from the script. You also want to assure that confidentiality. Again, you've got their participant ID number on there. You're not putting their name on there. It's just their ID. It's not affecting their services at all, how they answer. It doesn't have an impact at all on that. Really just for your program evaluation. And if at all possible, you might want to wait until some comfort has been established. Now, this is easier when you're doing a post-test or a retrospective test. You have some rapport and trust with them. But if you are doing the pre-test and you've got some of this coming up, maybe you wait until your second meeting with them so they get to know you a little bit better and you have some comfort established. And you also want to normalize and validate some of those less desirable responses. Like, they might feel a little embarrassed about marking things that don't look great for them. And you can say things like, many parents do struggle to meet the needs of their families. And so just normalizing and validating some of that is helpful as well, so that they feel more comfortable answering to their true selves instead of embarrassed about what that might look like. And then again, we've got the script for you, and you can always just go back and read if you want to highlight some of those lines in there about it that you think might help you handle some of these sensitive questions, please do that. That's why we've got the script to help you with these conversations with families. So before I go into some of our follow-up pieces, and even for those of you, even if you weren't at the March 16th training, which had been the first training just in deciding what survey to use, I think this information is very valuable. So please stay with us, even if you hadn't been at that training. These were participant questions that came up. But before I get into that, I just want to check in if there's any questions that have come in.
We have not seen any in the chat so far, Samantha. But again, if anyone has a question and you would like to come off of mute, raise a hand and let us know.
Yeah, please. I mean, you all have been listening to me talk for an hour and a half. And so if there's anything that's come up, I'm happy to answer questions related to the survey, how to use it with families, anything. So I'll get into some of this, but if a question pops up, we certainly can pause. But first thing I want to talk about, I've been mentioning the database, and I want to share a little bit more information on that. The database that we've created for the protective factor survey, it's a very easy database to use, is the first thing I want to tell you, very user-friendly. It is also free to set up. There is a monthly fee for the storage of the data. So we'll talk in a minute about the California rollout, but in general, if you are not in California or you're not going to be part of their database rollout, you can still use the protective factor survey database. You can go up to our website, all the information's up there. There's a manual on it. There's a link to how to get it set up. And so there is a free self-service option to set up the database for your own program. And you don't need to pay a setup fee for that. All that info is up on our website. Now, if for some reason that self-service option doesn't work for you, or you need a little bit more assistance, we do have our database company, which is Brand New Box. They can provide setup support. It's roughly around $2,000 for that setup support. Some folks do need to go this route with IT issues and security and other stuff within their programs. But for the most part, if you want to use the database and you're not part of a state rollout, you can set it up yourself for free via our website. There's instructions on how to use that in the database manual. It's pretty easy and straightforward. But I will tell you, there is a monthly fee to use the database. So you set it up for free. You put your programs and your agencies and everything in there. But there is a cost for establishing the system for continued use, because we've got to pay for the storage of your data and everything up there. So the cost for establishing a system, when you've set it up using that free self-service option, it's just a $5 fee. Now, this doesn't come to Friends. This isn't for us. It's a company called Elephant SQL. That's their fee, $5 a month to store the information. And again, all this information is on our website and in the manual that's specific to the database. So if you're trying to figure out cost, I'd say for the most part, you all can set this up on your own using the self-service. So then the cost to use a database for your own program, $5 a month, and you'll set up a reoccurring charge. You do need to set that up with a credit card, $5 reoccurring charge, and then you can get going into that database. So the database manual will walk you through how to set it up. I will tell you that at Friends, we unfortunately don't have the capacity to do like database trainings and demos and how-tos for anybody using the database. Our funding is specific to CBCAP. We're only able to offer those type of demos to CBCAP funded programs. So if you are not a CBCAP funded program, we won't be able to come in virtually and actually do any type of a demo with you. However, we have videos on that. And again, it's real easy to use, and we have the manual that outlines it all for you. If you do want to set up a demo account, let me know. You can reach out to me. I'll give you my contact information at the end of this. You can reach out to me. We can get you set up with a demo account to play around in the database. So if you need support in using it, that information is up there as well. Like we've got Brand New Box is sort of the overhead. You can set up some technical support with them. If you are part of the California rollouts, you'll be reaching out to OCAP and to Frenny to find out more about within California what your technical assistance is. But otherwise you would set up through Brand New Box if you're not a part of the California rollout. Just they're the company that oversees and manages the database, and they can help with technical assistance. So those are that's the database. One thing I do want to note, it's here on the slide. If you are in California and you want to use the database, before you enroll in the general database, just on our website, the self-service that I was talking about, check with your county representative or OCAP liaison to see if your county intends to use the online database as part of the larger California rollout, because then you'll be covered underneath that California rollout. You don't have to worry about your own. You won't have to pay the $5 a month. So if you're in California, please check in with your county representative. But those of you that are not a part of that, go ahead to our website and use the self-service option if you want to use the database. We've got a ton of people doing that. It's going really well.
Samantha, we've got one question in the chat.
Sure. What, can you read it to me? Or is
Sure
it a long
thing.
one?
Nope, it's a nice short one.
Okay.
Can the survey also be used with undocumented families?
It can, because we do not collect any of that type of information. The only thing with that might be language concerns if you're working with families that speak something besides Spanish. If you have the capacity for you all to have staff that can translate that you would have to do it face-to-face to translate that to have that conversation with them. But besides that, yes, it can be used with anyone. Dana, was that the only question?
That was our only question so far.
Okay. We'll
Oh.
keep that. Oh,
This one will be for CDSS, so you can keep going and we'll make sure people get connected.
okay. Want to talk a little bit about staff support, and this is staff support if you're struggling with using the survey. And I did give a lot of this information earlier when I was talking about handling sensitive questions. If you go back, when you look back at these slides, if you go back to supporting staff and administration of the survey. But I do want to tell you about a couple of resources in addition to this to help you. We will have this training recorded. We have up on our website, and I'll show you all this a little bit later when I give all of our resources, but on the Friends website, we have different recordings for these surveys. We have several different recorded trainings, how to use the survey, how to score the survey, how to analyze results, all of that. So you can go up and watch some of these training videos that are on our website that'll hopefully help support you in using the survey. Also encourage you to talk with your supervisor or your colleagues using the survey. If you are in California and a part of the OCAP rollout, of course, you can reach out to them for support. I shared already that the prevention resource guide in chapter 6, those conversations around protective factors, that can also help you get a better grasp of talking with families about protective factors. So several different supports there. If you have some specific questions, you're welcome to email me or call me anytime, and I'll see what resources I can get for you. And along with that, I had just mentioned about analyzing the data. And it really looks different. Like, we don't have a specific, this is how you analyze the PFS data, because it looks different depending on a lot of things. It depends what your program wants to analyze. It depends if you're using the database, your own database, an Excel sheet. It kind of also depends on all of that. If you're using the protective factors database, you can generate reports out of that to take a look at things. If you're using your own system, your best option is probably to use an Excel form to track and analyze data. Again, we recommend you have one person identified to do this, someone who's a little more knowledgeable in data and analysis. So if you have a data person and an evaluation person, they might be the best person to do that. There is a video in our resource media library on the Friends website specifically around this. We have one of our videos is on scoring the protective factor survey too. You can go watch that and learn about scoring it. And the other one is about interpreting results from the survey. Those are 2 different videos up there, free. You can look at them anytime. It'll walk you through some of that information. So please be sure, if this is something that's of interest to you, to check that out. Dana, are there any more questions that came up?
There haven't been any more in the chat yet.
Okay, I just see my little chat number. I can't see the chats, but want to talk a little bit. We had some questions around rural use of the survey. And the first thing I want to say is we haven't seen a large difference in how to administer the protective factor survey in urban versus rural. One thing though, because we do know out in rural populations, sometimes it's harder for participants to physically come and see you. And that's where the database can actually be a benefit, because you can send a link. Maybe you have a phone call or something with a participant, and then you can send them the link to complete the survey. And it reduces the need for them to come into your office or for you to go out to them. It also reduces the time needed if they are, far enough away. So I will say, when it comes to rural, sometimes the database can actually be a benefit. But in general, we don't see a difference in administration. I wanted to give you a couple of examples, though, of where we're seeing the survey being used in rural areas. And I actually wanted to share a couple of tribal examples with you. We've got actually 8 different tribal and migrant grantees that also received some of the CDCAP funding. And several of them are using the protective factor survey. One of them is San Carlos Apache tribe. And they are, about a couple hours from Phoenix in very rural Arizona, San Carlos, Arizona. And they're starting to use this survey with families that they're working with, and have seen that it's really giving good program information. So that's an example of both rural and tribal, as well as Kickapoo, which is in Kansas. They are also using the survey, and they're working with protective factors, and really talking about how culture is a protective factor for families. So happy to share, if anybody wants to reach out separately to me, I'm happy to share more information on that. But that's some examples of some rural use, also tribal use of the protective factor survey and the protective factors themselves. So a little bit of information, but like I said, we're seeing this being used a lot of different places, and very successfully in rural and urban settings. And speaking of different settings for protective factors, we had a question about how to integrate protective factors into programs in the school system, and share a couple of examples here too. One of them is from a family resource center in Baltimore, so out east, other side of the country than California. And they are working with young parents and young children around protective factors and healthy outcomes, and talking with the schools about that as well. But that's an example when we talk about programs here. Family resource centers are great programs to enhance protective factors and look at how to increase protective factors. I know we've seen lately a lot of family resource centers using CBCAP funding around concrete supports, which is a protective factor with families. And so that's some of the examples we're seeing with different programs. Another way too, when we think about the school system and protective factors, is having school staff trained in the protective factors. We know that schools have different staff development, professional development days. If you have a rapport with the schools in your neighborhood or the school districts, if you're able to find some time on one of those development days to do a short piece around the protective factors, it's a great thing for teachers and staff at schools to be knowledgeable in, for them to help recognize when families and children might need resources or different things. So always exploring different ways to talk about protective factors and to expand knowledge to other people is really helpful. So I think I got through all of the questions that we had received before. What I want to do now, and I know we've been doing this throughout, but if there's questions or comments that you have related to anything we've talked about today, or if you just have some questions about friend stuff, you're welcome to ask. Think about that, put that in the chat. I'm going to turn to Frenny for a minute. I see your hand raised.
Thanks, Samantha. So I just wanted to offer some clarifying information about the database. So as Samantha has mentioned, we in California are rolling out the database. LA County did the pilot for us, and it started in about 2018, 2019, and now it is fully implemented in LA County. So what we've done is we focused in on OCAP prevention funding programs to use the database. On March 17th, April 17th, we are having a training for county staff that are interested in possibly implementing the database. And this is county staff, this is county child welfare staff specifically, that might have an interest in looking at including the database as part of their evaluation processes. Now, CBOs, community-based organizations, and other agencies that are not necessarily county-based will also have a training in early summer. But we first want to show county staff how to kind of administer the database and give that high-level overview training. And then we'll go into having a more specific community-based training for our providers. And most of those providers are probably going to be OCAP funded providers. And we can help you link to your OCAP liaison, and I put the email in that chat. But I just wanted to make sure that folks knew, if you're interested as a county staff, if you're interested in being a part of the database rollout, please email at ocap-pnd@dss.ca.gov, and we'll be going through that. We can go ahead and reach out to you with a link for the April 17th and with more information about the database. I also want to make a clarifying point. Samantha had mentioned that there is a fee associated. There's no fee associated if you're part of the California database rollout. But if you want a separate database, say that your county will not be a part of the rollout, say you're an organization that still wants to use the database, that's when that fee applies. And that's when you would be working directly with Samantha. And if you are a CBCAP funded organization, then you can get that TA. If you're not, there is a limited probably TA available, but we at CDSS can also help provide a little bit of support. We're also learning, just as a side note, we as a team are still learning how to use these things. So we are also going to be relying quite heavily on friends for our technical assistance. So just bear with us as we go through this rollout. And the reason we're doing this in stages is because we recognize that there is a possibility that TA would be extensive. And so we're trying to kind of identify those counties that have, especially if you're organizations that don't generally measure outcomes, but are looking to measure outcomes, this is a good resource. It's a free tool. And we are touching base with those counties that have our funding organizations that require further evaluation methodologies. So I just wanted to offer those clarifying. So please, if you have questions about the database specifically, please feel free to email out to us.
Thank you, Franny. And I did see the question in the chat about if you're not part of the OCAP rollout, whether you're in California or outside of California. And I know you, Franny, addressed some of that. And I just want to say, like, we have made it as easy as we can to use both the survey and the database, even if you're not part of any of the rollouts and you're not really going to be able to receive much technical assistance or support from us. We've set it up to be fairly straightforward and simple. If you go to our website, you've got the surveys right there to download. If you want to use the database, the page is right there on the Protective Factor Survey page. The manual walks you step by step through how to set it up. It'll walk you through how to set up to pay that $5 a month if you're paying for that on your own. And so there really isn't too much of a need for a lot of support. You can certainly do it on your own if you're interested. Talk with your programs or your agencies, whoever you need to get the authorization to do that. But we've tried to make it as easy as possible for this to be used by anyone, really, if you'd like to. And with that, I'm actually gonna go back to our website real quick to show you that, and then I'm gonna also show you the concrete support subscale, because I know we had somebody ask about that. So let's go take a quick look at both of these. This is still that prevention guide. We'll go back to our friend's website. So here on our friend's website, there's a couple ways to look at it. The easiest way I'll tell you, when you're looking at protective factor survey, if you want more information on the database, when you're up here under evaluation, you come to protective factors, the database jets out like this. Now you can also look at it by scrolling down through here. And before I go to the database real quick, I do want to show you under PFS2 on our protective factors, here are those informational training videos I mentioned. For those of you that want more information, these videos include the videos on scoring and interpreting results. So those are all right there for you under PFS2, more training videos if you want more information. But let's go ahead and take a look at the database information, not the database itself. That's a whole other training. We don't have time for that in the next 12 minutes, but the database itself, here's our webpage on it. And down here, how you get started. If you are not part of the CBCAP funded program, here's the link that you would follow. Follow the information there to get started with setting up your account. It's that easy. Click on that brand new box, walks you through all of it. So it's all here on this page. You also have the user manual for the database, which I said walks you through everything to do. There's also some video tutorials that are coming soon. We are working on them. We're really busy right now, but we are working on them, I promise. I know they've been recorded, some of them are being recorded right now. So those should be out soon as well. But we do have our print resources and our user manuals. So this is all up here. You guys can go ahead and get started on your own if you're not part of the California thing. So I'm going to go back to our protective factors survey page, and real quickly under PFS2, this is the concrete support subscale. So again, it has the information on the optional information page on the front. You skip over that. This is what you give if you want to, if you're using the PFS2 and you really want to look at measuring these concrete supports. And this is something you can give as a pre-test, especially if you're using the retrospective, and you're only going to have your retrospective information at the end and you want information at the beginning. But this is what the concrete supports look like. So it is, I saw the question in there, you're asking if it was just a couple of items. It's actually a full on a scale here. So you can take a look at some of the questions that are here. It talks about if they had issues paying for things, affording things, asks about their medical, dental care, if they've been evicted. It talks about transportation, and then it goes into marking responses for things about, again, affording food, affording what they need, and then it gets information about your children. So this really takes a look at just what concrete supports they really need some help with. So this is, you can download this right from our website and get it there. And it's got demographic information in there too that you can choose to have. So that's a standalone. It's a separate document. You don't have to go and pull it out from the survey itself. Are there other questions that ended up in the chat?
Yes. We have one more about I think it's about the concrete support subscale, but what if it's not, let me know. It says, when is the best time to utilize the concrete support?
Thank you. Yeah. So you can use this multiple times. It's helpful at the beginning because it gives you a snapshot of the immediate needs of the family. If they're having transportation needs, housing needs, having troubles affording things, like it gives you that snapshot at the beginning and then you know. But you can use it throughout service with the family to kind of check in on where they are, especially if you're seeing someone over a longer period of time. So it really depends, but it is helpful to do it at the beginning to give you information about the family. think that was all I saw on there, Dana. Is that right?
I haven't seen more.
Okay. So let's try to do something fun and interactive as long as technology helps today. So we're going to do what's called a poll everywhere, if you've ever done this before. And so if you've got your cell phone with you, it's probably the easiest way. If you don't have your cell phone, there is a website down on the lower right that you can go to. If you've got your phone, you want to go in to where it says new message. And in the to part, you're going to put 22333. And then in where you would put your message to somebody, you want to type in friends, the letter N, 382. So go ahead and do that right now. I'll give you a second to do that. And again, you can visit this pollev.com if you'd rather do it online. Visit that browser. And you'll get a kickback message when you send this text message to 22333. You should get a kickback that you have joined our friends thing. And I'm going to ask you a question in a moment on the next slide, and you can respond with one word. If you're responding with more than one word to the question, you're going to want to use a little tilde between the words to keep them together, because if you put your words without the, I think it's called a tilde between it, the words will come up separately, and we're going to do a little word cloud. So at the bottom there, you see what that little thing looks like if you want to use more than one word to answer the question. But one word answers are really helpful too. So if everybody's done this and sent their text message, now you're going to respond in the same text to what would help you be successful in using the protective factors survey. And this is for us to really get an idea of what you all might need. And you might see words that other people are putting in and you're like, that's my word. Go ahead and send it in, because it'll make the word bigger. So if you're seeing some words here and one of them really resonates with you, make it bigger. Definitely seeing database as a big one in community. Give me just a couple more seconds to do this. And you can do it more than once. If you want to send in a word and you want to send in a different word, keep going. Keep going. And Dana, I'm going to send this to you after, and Frenny, so you guys have this and know what people are saying. So kind of a fun, different way to get a look at this. So, you know, there's some big words that are standing out here. Community, I'm seeing, support, and database. And the database is a huge one, and we've talked about it today. We'll continue to talk about it, whether you're part of the California rollout or otherwise. You've got the information to access it. I encourage you to go in once you have access and set it up to play with it and get to know it. It really is very user-friendly once you're in there. I'm wondering, I'm seeing the word community a lot. If anybody wants to elaborate on what that might mean, feel free to put that in the chat if you want to elaborate on community. I'm curious about what that means. Support, that's all that we're trying to do with our videos and stuff right now. And these trainings, of course. Partnership, participation, OCAP, see an OCAP pop up in there. Progress reports, distance, training. Good. Great. Well, database and support are certainly the two that are popping up here, and we're gonna save this for both myself with friends, so I know, but also for OCAP and Frenny and all of them, so they know as they're doing this rollout what is really important to all of you. This is really helpful so that we can see this and know what you feel could help you the most, because that's really what we want. We want to make sure you feel supported and safe. Yeah, and Betty is saying it would be beneficial as a whole if many county agencies use the survey to see where we are as a whole and how we can help the community grow. Oh, great. So that's the community piece. Wonderful. Thank you. Great. Well, this is looking good. It's fun to see this way and to hear from all of you now that you've been through this to understand what would help you the most. So thank you. And if you send a couple more in, it'll continue to populate even as I move away and I'll be able to save it later. So just a reminder, because we are almost at time and I know a lot of you are probably hungry for lunch. Here's our resources. Again, you've seen the website. I showed it to you many times, but you know, you've got user manuals up there, the surveys themselves, and also the database information, including the manual and the link to set up the database yourself. So please go up there, poke around. We also have some other resources on our friend's website in our online learning center. We've got a course on the protective factors. So spend some time up there and get to know the website. This is my contact information. You are welcome to reach out to me with follow-up questions. If there's anything you need some clarification on, please do so. And I just want to thank you all for being here with me today, and I'll turn it back to Caltrin if there's anything else.
Thanks, Samantha. We really appreciate your time today and how specific all of the tips and strategies were. There was a lot to take away for programs who are already using the PFS or PFS2, as well as some really specific next steps and a really good picture for programs that are looking at using the protective factor survey. All of the resources that Samantha shared today will be in the follow-up message, which you'll receive in the next 2 days, as well as the recordings. You'll have those at hand. You can share them with your teams. And you will see in the chat right now that there is a link to a brief survey that we would really appreciate if you spent just a couple minutes on. Tell us what you thought, where you need more help, particularly as you move forward. And there is a survey at the end of that certificate. And finally, if you have just 1 extra hour tomorrow to end your week right, Caltrin will be hosting the Science of Social Support with Dr. Julie Radlauer-Dorfler. And so we would love for you to head on out to our website and register for that as well. We hope you have a fantastic day and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.